The woman's hand trembled as she placed the fresh carnations on the windowsill, the same windowsill where frost had crept like spider silk every winter since 1943. Her knuckles were swollen, arthritic, mapping decades of faithful ritual. The wallpaper behind her had faded from cream to the color of old teeth, its floral pattern now barely distinguishable beneath water stains that bloomed like bruises. A single photograph sat on the mantel, a young soldier with kind eyes, his uniform pressed, his smile frozen in sepia permanence. But it was the chair that unsettled visitors most worn smooth in the exact shape of her body, positioned to face both window and door simultaneously, as if she'd spent 70 years refusing to choose between watching and waiting. "He promised he'd come back," she whispered to the empty room, her voice carrying the weight of something far stranger than grief. Had she been waiting for a man, or had she been waiting for permission to stop? When Lieutenant James Whitmore kissed Helen Daventry goodbye on the Southampton docks in March 1943, he pressed something into her palm, not a ring, but a small compass with a broken needle. "It always points home," he said, though both of them could see it spinning uselessly. The harbor smelled of diesel fuel and salt, and somewhere behind them, a mother was sobbing into her son's uniform. Helen's fingers closed around the brass circle, still warm from his pocket, and she felt the sharp edge where the glass had cracked. The crowds pressed against them, 422 men boarding the HMS Resolute that morning, heading for North Africa, most of them boys who'd never seen the Mediterranean except in school at Laces. She wanted to memorize everything, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his collar sat slightly crooked, the exact pressure of his fingers against hers. 3 months, he promised. 6 at most. She would repeat those words for the next 71 years. The last letter arrived on June 4, 1943, postmarked from Algiers, written in James's steady hand across both sides of thin paper that crinkled like dead leaves. "Dearest, the heat here makes England feel like a dream. Yesterday I saw a man selling oranges in the market and I bought 6, thinking of your mother's marmalade. Foolish, I know. There's talk of moving east within the fortnight. I carry your photograph next to my heart. It stops bullets in the cinema, perhaps it works in life too. All my love, Jay." Then, silence. The kind of silence that swallows sound, that grows teeth, that learns to answer when you call its name. Helen wrote every week regardless letters that piled up at the War Office, forwarded to units that no longer existed, rerouted to field hospitals where the registries had been burned. Her mother suggested she stop. The vicar suggested she pray. Her sister Margaret suggested she accept reality. Helen suggested they mind their own bloody business. By autumn 1943, the War Office sent the telegram that 11,000 other families received that year. Missing in action, not dead, not captured. Missing a word that left a door open just wide enough for hope to slip through like cold air under a threshold. Scale paragraph. Between 1939 and 1945, approximately 40,000 British servicemen were officially listed as missing in action. Of these, 17% were eventually confirmed dead through recovered remains. Another 23% were identified in POW camps during or after liberation. That left roughly 24,000 men who simply vanished, swallowed by deserts, seas, jungles, or the chaos of retreat. The Red Cross processed over 36 million information requests during the war years. In North Africa, specifically between May 1943 and May 1945, Allied forces reported 947 men missing after the Tunisia campaign. Many buried by sandstorms, some absorbed into local populations, others walking wounded who died in unmarked graves. Across 200,000 square miles of wasteland. Helen kept every newspaper clipping about soldiers found alive years after armistice. A RAF pilot discovered living with Bedouins in 1949, a tankman pulled from a Burmese prison camp in 1947, 3 infantrymen who'd been hiding in Italian caves, convinced the war was still raging. If it happened to them, why not James? She refused to pack away his things, transforming their small cottage into a museum of interrupted life. His shaving brush stood sentinel by the bathroom mirror, bristles stiff with ancient soap. His jacket hung in the wardrobe, moth-eaten now, smelling of mothballs and the ghost of his cologne. She set the table for 2 every evening, 1 plate for her meager supper, 1 plate empty except for hope. Neighbors called her eccentric at first, then disturbed, then finally just poor Helen. Margaret tried once to clear out the jacket, and Helen didn't speak to her for 3 years. "He'll need it when he returns," Helen said simply, as if this explained everything. Perhaps it did. Perhaps madness is just logic following different laws. In 1947, a woman in Brighton claimed she saw James Whitmore buying fish at the market. In 1952, a veteran wrote to Helen saying he'd met a man matching James's description in a Cairo hospital confused, calling himself by a different name, but with the same scar above his eyebrow. In 1958, an Australian tourist photographed a street musician in Tangier who bore an uncanny resemblance. Helen examined each lead with the intensity of an archaeologist translating ancient texts. She traveled to Brighton, false alarm a cousin, not James. She wrote to the Cairo hospital, destroyed in riots, records lost. She obtained the Tangier photograph and kept it in her Bible, though even she admitted the man looked older, heavier, wrong somehow. Were these sightings evidence of survival, or were they the universe's cruelest gift to those who refuse to grieve? Psychiatrists might call it capgras delusion, seeing the lost beloved in every stranger's face. Spiritualists might call it soul recognition, the way grief tunes us to frequencies others can't hear. By 1960, Helen Daventry was no longer a woman waiting for her fiancé. She had become the woman who waits. A local legend, a cautionary tale whispered to young girls about love's dangers. Teenagers dared each other to knock on her door. The newspaper ran a human interest story. 17 years and counting, Southampton's most faithful heart. They made her sound noble and tragic. But the photograph they published showed something else. A woman whose eyes had learned to look past the present tense entirely, focused on a horizon only she could see. She took a job at the library, shelving books about North Africa, prisoner of war accounts, miracle reunions. During her lunch breaks, she wrote letters to the War Graves Commission, the Ministry of Defense, veterans organizations across 3 continents. Every letter ended the same way. He promised he would come back. He keeps his promises. Between 1945 and 1975, the British War Graves Commission received over 127,000 individual queries about missing servicemen. They maintained files on 31,842 unresolved cases. Of those, approximately 2,100 were eventually solved through dental records, personal effects recovered decades later, or deathbed confessions from fellow soldiers who'd witnessed the deaths but never reported them. The average time from disappearance to resolution was 18 years. The longest unresolved case before closure was 34 years. Helen's vigil would eventually exceed both numbers. Friends died. Margaret died. Helen's mother died. James's parents died. The world moved on, rationing ended. The empire collapsed. Men walked on the moon, and still Helen waited. Her hair turned white, then translucent. Her hands developed tremors. She needed a cane, then a walker. The cottage around her aged in parallel, roof tiles cracking, pipes groaning, foundations settling into earth like a body preparing for burial. In 1973, a metal detector enthusiast found a British officer's identification tag half buried in Tunisian sand name. J. Whitmore, SERIL number matching. The ministry sent Helen a formal letter, gently suggesting this constituted significant evidence of death in theater. They offered to arrange a memorial service to finally list him among the confirmed dead. Helen read the letter once, folded it precisely in thirds, and placed it in the drawer with all the others she deemed insufficient. The identification tag could have been lost, stolen, planted. Soldiers traded them sometimes, superstitious rituals to confuse death. She'd read about it in one of her books. Where's the body? She asked the ministry official who came to her door, where's the grave? Where's the proof? He had no answer. The desert keeps its secrets. Every year on March 14th, the anniversary of his departure, Helen photographed the empty chair by the window. 71 photographs eventually arranged chronologically on her bedroom wall, like frames in a very slow film. What they documented wasn't waiting but transformation. The chair's fabric fading from navy to gray, the window frame warping, the seasons cycling past in squares of light and shadow. In the early photos, you could see Helen's reflection in the window glass, young still, defiant. In the later ones, she'd become a ghost herself, barely visible, merging with the furniture. A photography student discovered these images after Helen's death and exhibited them in London. Critics called them a meditation on time's violence. They missed the point entirely. In 1984, Helen woke at 3 a.m. with a thought that split her skull. What if he did come back and I'd aged so much he didn't recognize me? She stumbled to the mirror, 74 years old now, face mapped with wrinkles, body bent like a question mark. Would he know her? Could love survive such transformation? She stood there until dawn, watching her reflection blur with tears, and for the first time in 41 years, she allowed herself to imagine not waiting. Imagined packing his jacket, donating his books, sitting in the chair without purpose. The freedom of it was terrifying. The emptiness was worse. By sunrise, she'd placed fresh carnations on the windowsill. Some prisons we build ourselves. Some prisons we call home. They found the letters after she died, hundreds of them, stuffed in shoeboxes under the bed, arranged by date. Letters she'd written to James every week for 71 years. Never sent because there was no address that could reach the missing. They read like a one-sided conversation with time itself. Descriptions of weather, neighborhood gossip, world events, aging's small indignities. In the final letters, written in a hand barely legible, she'd started addressing him differently. My dearest ghost. My beautiful delusion, my reason for mourning. Had she known all along? Had faith been her choice rather than her curse? Helen Daventry died on March 13, 2014, one day before what would have been their 71st anniversary of waiting. The cottage sold to a young couple who painted over the water stains, replaced the windows, burned the worn chair because it smelled of age. They found the compass with the broken needle in a kitchen drawer and threw it away, not knowing it had once been a promise. In the cemetery, they buried Helen next to a granite marker that read, Lieutenant James Whitmore, 1918 to 1943, missing in action, presumed dead. The stonemason had asked Helen's executor, should they add her as his wife? They were never married, came the answer. So Helen got her own stone 3 feet away, close enough to touch if stones had hands. But here's what they didn't know. In 1987, a Tunisian farmer plowing his field discovered human remains in a collapsed shelter, along with British uniform fragments and a photograph of a young woman with dark hair. DNA testing wasn't advanced enough then. The remains were catalogued, boxed, placed in a military archive in Tripoli,